This is a tarot reading for the Chinese New Year, for the entire year of the dragon, which starts on February the 10th. Now, it's the lunar New Year, so it isn't exactly a year, but it lasts around a year. And February the 10th is quite late, so the date shifts every year. But it's somewhere around the end of January, beginning of February always. If you're unsure of what Chinese zodiac sign you are, if you look in my notes, there's a crib there which lets you know. And it's based on the year that you were born, rather than the month that you were born. But if you're born at the end of the year, it's a little bit more complicated, and you'd need to look it up. So this is for the entire year of the dragon, but it's for the sign of the snake. Snakes. This doesn't look to be a year where things get resolved. I don't know how distressing that will be to you, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. The overall energy, the middle card there, Hanged Man, you're waiting around. Maybe it's enforced, maybe you're just doing it because you're waiting to see the lie of the land, but yeah, you're waiting around. Like so many of us, you see the past as a much better time, and I think objectively it was. Certainly it feels like a time of more love, more understanding. Right now you're struggling a bit. You feel like you're carrying the burden of the world on your back, but you do know that an end is in sight. In the future you're going to be stuck between different courses of action, not knowing which is the best one to go for. Yeah, and what leads to the outcome is conflict. Now I think maybe conflict is a recurring theme, which is why you're feeling somewhat stymied and stuck. This is actually a conflict that's easily resolvable if only you can talk things through. Maybe you can't, but you know, it's that type of conflict. I suspect you can, because what changes the outcome is the energy of working with others, maybe providing a sort of a gentle nudge to others, inspiring others to do things. So as I say, I think it is resolvable if only you can find this, and this is something of a recurring theme throughout this year, and that is there are alternatives, there are different junctures that you can change your trajectory if only you can take them. The outcome which comes from the conflict is you being stuck on different ideas, different ways of seeing things, and not quite knowing how to see it. Of course, the sort of conflict I'm talking about is exactly this. You may see one way of doing it, and those you're in conflict with see another. So this would be typical for that sort of thing. As I say, overall it feels very stymied. That isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but let's explore in more detail and see how really it is for you. Now the overall energy for this reading is that of the Hanged Man. This is you waiting around for something to happen. But given that it's for a full year, it's not a great thing to be doing for an entire year. Your life on hold. Has this been enforced upon you? Maybe. Or is it something that you're doing because you're waiting to see the lie of the land before acting? I mean, that would be a reasonable thing to do, wouldn't it? The world is in a degree of chaos at the moment. None of us really know the real direction. So waiting around to see what happens isn't a bad strategy. And you know, I think it doesn't matter whether it's imposed upon you or it's by choice. Like I say, it doesn't seem like a bad thing to be doing, but you know, I do feel that there are things in this whereby you simply don't have the information, and therefore just waiting to try and find out isn't, well, it seems like a reasonable thing to be doing, really, doesn't it? And like so many of us, you look towards the past as something of a golden age. Golden age of love, a golden age of relationships, of families, of probably multiple blessings. Of course, to a certain degree, this is rose-tinted spectacles, but I think objectively the past was a better time. So you are looking to the past, but we can't recreate it, and we need to change, we need to move on. And I think that's what a lot of this reading is about, that you do need to grasp change, but you really don't feel you've got the information, you don't know what you should be doing. And so you're reluctant to take decisions, you're reluctant to do what you need to do. And I completely get it, I completely understand it. I mean, this could be quite a personal card, it could be that there's been a family breakup or something like that. Many of us have experienced some form of family breakup as a result of the health crisis. I don't need to tell you my story, but, and you know, it wasn't, well, it had got nothing to do with the health issue, but it was the governments around the world's response to it, partially, created an unresolvable rift between me and my family in the UK. You don't need to know the details, but you know what I mean. What I'm getting at is so many of us have experienced some sort of trauma, often involving families, and we see it personally, but you know, if it hadn't have been for the restrictions of the health crisis, it would never have occurred for me. So, you know, we do look to the past as this sort of better time. And right now is a time of struggle for you. A time when you feel like you're carrying the burdens of the world on your back. A time when you're feeling under stress, under pressure. There is hope, and there is an end in sight, and I think you need to keep hold of that hope and that end in sight. But so many of us do feel like, you know, we're carrying this massive extra burden. For me, I mean, maybe it's because I'm in another country to that of my birth. But increasingly the behaviour of those around me feels like children. You know, if the slightest thing goes wrong in their lives, they come to me for money. I don't actually earn money. These are people who earn money, and you know, they have a slight misfortune, and they look to me to replace the money that they've lost or what have you. And the excuses they make for their lack of responsibility, lack of personal responsibilities, are positively juvenile. Now, I'm not uncompassionate towards people, but I just can't believe the lack of maturity. And you know, we're talking about not only adults, but quite reasonably middle-aged to elderly adults that all come to me in this way, like I'm the father of the world, you know, and I mean, I do what I can at times, but at other times I just think it's outrageous, you know. So it is a huge burden that gets piled on me, and I think you're feeling something quite similar to that. As I say, there is hope, there is an end to it, and hold on to that. And in the future, you have important decisions to make. How are you going to act? So this is an end to this hanging around. But you're finding it very difficult to make. Very difficult because of... they probably seem very similar. Or that you still don't have the full information that you need. I think they're quite radical things that you have in mind. Something far removed from what you're used to, maybe. And I'm certain that's what we are being asked to do, to follow a new paradigm. But it doesn't feel like one that comes easy to you. Maybe nor indeed natural to you. But we have to make decisions, we have to make choices. And I think what spurs you into acting, stopping this hanging around, is conflict. Now, we've all been through a lot of conflict recently, but this is another conflict. It's one of those conflicts whereby the solution is there if you look out for it. If you only need to talk things through, but it's one of people pulling in different directions. Maybe even wanting to achieve the same thing, but having completely different views on how to get there. Seems to be a lot of that in the world at the moment, doesn't there? And you know, it can be resolved with talk, if it's possible to talk, but it can be resolved. And this forces you to think of things differently. It forces you ultimately to act. So even though the conflict might not seem like a welcome thing, it feels like something that's perhaps necessary. Snakes, I don't think you see yourself as a leader. I don't think you see yourself as somebody that inspires others. But I think you've got this quiet influence that you could use. And so you could perhaps avoid the conflict and maybe change the outcome by pursuing a more sort of diplomatic route to what you want to achieve. And I think you can do it. It does feel like you can do it. So I think there is an alternative here. And this has been cropping up, well, for everybody's readings, to be honest, in this year of the dragon. And that is, there are alternative routes, and you have free will, you know. I'm only talking about energies that impact on you. So an alternative to sort of focusing on the conflict, even though I say you can talk it through, but would be more to take a leadership role, a power behind the throne perhaps type of leadership, the type of leadership whereby you encourage others. The flip side of that could be manipulation, but I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think, no, it's a quiet power that you can use. And if you do use it, I think the outcomes might be better. Not that they're bad, and I think it's all very necessary. But you might have an easier life if, instead of seeing conflict, you saw opportunities. Now, the outcome, I don't think it's a bad outcome. It's about weighing up options. Weighing up options that there doesn't seem to be one that's better than the other. But just as I say, I think the conflict forces you to do it. And if you remember the future, we had this different courses of actions that you're weighing up. So this is really saying, okay, well, maybe there's different ideas, different ways of seeing things. I'm not too certain that well, I don't think you do favour one or the other. So it's a difficult decision that you're being forced to take. And of course you have been hanging around for what looks like the best part of the year before you take it. But it looks as though because you've been inactive, you're being pushed into making a decision. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all. So I don't see it as a bad outcome. But I think we need to get a little bit of clarity on some things here. Because there's clearly some things going on in the background that we've not picked up on from this spread so far. And I'm going to seek clarity on this conflict card. And it isn't what I was expecting. The first card of clarity is the King of Swords. So you do have the information. The next card of clarity is the Five of Pentacles. Card of poverty, maybe no friends. And the final card of clarity is the Devil card. A card of healthy attachments. Not what I was expecting at all. This has thrown me somewhat. So yeah, the first card of clarity is the King of Swords. An incredibly wise king. A king who's experienced it all before and knows what to do. A king that people come to for advice. So why are you stymied and why can't you make decisions? I think it's because you know what needs to be done and what should be done. But you're mindful of not challenging others too much and hoping that maybe people will come to the right conclusion if you do nothing. Yeah, it's a king who's very wise, this. So the conflict comes about because people perhaps even perceive that you do know and can't understand why you're doing nothing. You know, I'll illustrate this with a little story. It's not really about conflict, but I've got a friend and he's coming up for retirement and he's built a very, very nice coffee shop in his garden. Unfortunately, his house isn't in a particularly central area and it's at the back of his house, so I mean it's not easy to get to. But he got his doctorate in Japan, and so he's developed what is a sort of Japanese concept of a coffee shop. And he's very effectively targeted at young people who like to work in coffee shops. On their laptops because of the free Wi-Fi. And he's actually, I've been to see it, it's really nice. I think he's getting as many people that would fit that profile as he could where he is. And I'm sure he's going to tell me that he's not making enough money. And I'm absolutely certain he didn't do any research before he built it on what the size of the market was, nor probably does he have any idea of his empty plate cost, which is central to running a cafe. And the only solution to him not making enough money is to raise his costs. And he'll probably tell me, well, I can't possibly do that, nobody would come. And, that might be the case, but at least you'd find out, wouldn't you? You'd find out that it wasn't a sustainable business. But, I know he's going to ask me, how can I help him to get more customers? And, I'm not saying anything because I don't want to offend him. I will eventually, I know. But I don't want to offend him, But he wants to push me. I'm sure he wants to push me down. How do I do this? How do I do that? Without asking for my real expertise. When I can see exactly what the problem is, But I'm reluctant to show my hand. And that's what this situation feels like. And now we have this Five of Pentacles, card of poverty or being alone. Now what I need to say, it's often a psychological issue, a poverty mentality. And there's always hope, there always is hope. It's probably a short-lived thing. Do you know, I think we're all feeling the pinch. We're all feeling that things are nothing like as good as they used to be. And if you remember your rose-tinted spectacles, as I called them, of the past. Is this leading to conflict all around? Well, it probably is, I look at my village in Java, and as a result of the health crisis, people couldn't earn money. Now, that's not as bad as it sounds, because most people have got enough land to grow enough food to feed themselves and their family. What they didn't have was any money coming in. Many don't pay actual taxes, but there will be payments they would have needed to make, and there was no money coming in at all. So a good many people started businesses, maybe a bit like my friend's Japanese coffee shop, and probably like his coffee shop, they didn't make the money they expected. And now people are feeling the pinch because the banks are demanding the money back. And they're running round their neighbours, me in particular, asking to be bailed out. And it's just causing resentment everywhere. I wonder if that's what this conflict is all about. Something like that. People feeling the pinch and looking to others to bail them out. And it's funny, I came out with that story of how people are like children and come to me whenever there's a problem, It's feeling like I got it spot on, isn't it? Even though I didn't realise. And now we have the card of the energy, the devil. Unhealthy attachments or addictions. And I think, my little analogies have hit the nail on the head. Because I've got another one to tell you. Another British person living in Indonesia, who's always lived it up. He rents a very big villa in a gated community. He's always rented posh cars, etc., etc., had servants. And his wife's very fond of dogs. Despite being Muslim, she's very fond of dogs. And they've got about 30, And I got a phone call from him saying he didn't... And he's always done some business in Indonesia. And I've never been able to do any business or get any work. To a certain degree, I'm not allowed to. He gets round it because they're his wife's businesses. But, well, anyway, the circumstances are different. But what I'm saying is, he is somebody that earns money, lives it up, shows. And he phoned me up, and this was a few years ago, don't get me wrong, to say he hadn't got enough money to feed the dogs. It's like, what on earth does that got to do with me? And people are addicted to their lifestyles. And when money's short, they cannot possibly contemplate cutting back at all. And feel that others should fill in the gap. And I am certain that's what this conflict is about. Yeah, I'm certain that's what it's about. And therefore, you're being forced to take decisions because people have expectations. And of course we had that card of burden. People have expectations of you, that you're there to help them. And Snakes, I think you're going to have to take some very important decisions here. I can summarise for you, can't I? Snakes, this hasn't turned out as I thought it would at all. You're somewhat stymied, you're reluctant to act. But it's not for the reasons that I thought. You know that times have changed, that the good times of the past are no longer with us. And I think you're deeply concerned about that. And you're a very wise person. And people come to you for advice. But rarely do they actually want your advice as much as you to help them out, such as with money. So any problem that people have, they come to you and put on your shoulders. And because of the so many crises in the world now, it's feeling like a huge burden for you. A huge burden. And indeed, because you're not doing anything, because you can see through it all, you're reluctant to act. But it's going to cause conflict because so many people are coming to you and expecting you to bail them out of situations that are of their own creation. People are coming to you, maybe asking for money because they can't afford the payments on their Lamborghini and you don't even have a car. It's that sort of a ridiculous situation that leads to a conflict. And because of that conflict, you're going to have to act. And now, because you are clever, what you've been trying to do, and I think you might succeed, is push people in the direction that you think they need to be pushed in. For people to try and help people become more responsible. Try and explain to people that the world has changed and we cannot expect to have all that we used to have. But it's difficult, you've been avoiding it because you were hoping they'd come to their own conclusions. But if you can't do that, then you're going to be forced into taking decisions, difficult decisions, probably about putting boundaries around your life for others. And that is likely to force you into some quite radical new actions. And I think the universe is pushing you in that direction. It's saying that you do need to do that. So it wasn't what I expected at all, Snake. But you are a clever person. You are. Remember that.